moving to investment, because my main interest of research is why countries incorporate investment rules in their preferential trade agreements. And there might be different reasons to do so. So why is that interesting? Well, what we see over the last years, basically since the 1990s, and we talked about that yesterday, is that trade agreements in general are proliferating, and they are also becoming deeper. So they cover more areas, and they're becoming stricter, more restrictive. And one of these aspects is also investment rules. And actually we see that the share of trade agreements that covers investment rules has increased over the last years and decades. So it has just become more common. It has also maybe become more important because we've just heard a lot about global value chains, and actually much of the economic activity today is going on via multinational enterprises. So trade and investment are very closely interlinked. So maybe it might just make sense to include investment in trade agreements and not negotiate separately. But then it has also become a lot more controversial, like with the rising number of investor-state dispute settlement cases, mostly on the basis of bilateral investment treaties, but potentially also on the basis of trade agreements. There's rising opposition against these rules, and we also see that, of course, in Europe in the context of TTIP. So this is a slide on the EU. My empirical analysis itself will be, of course, on all countries because I need lots of observations to do that properly. But just to give you an idea, so this is the EU trade agreements until 2010, I believe. And I've separated the columns into those that do not include investment, those that include investment rules or mention investment, but are not enforceable, and then those that are enforceable. And the distinction is made on the basis of a data set by Bruhn et al. And Kohl et al. That look at the legal language that is used. So, I mean, of course, you can say we endeavor to cooperate in the context of cooperation, which is basically nothing, or it's actually precise legal language which gives rise to dispute settlement mechanisms, for example. And there you can see actually that it's quite diverse what the EU has been doing based on this data set. So around half of them include investment, half don't. And then it's also separate depending on the type of country they're negotiating with. So the dark blue is in the EU agreement negotiated with a developing country, and the gray one is negotiated with a developed country. And what we see is that investment is included in many of the North and South agreements where the EU negotiates with developing countries. But when it comes to enforceability, it's actually mostly equal partners where we find these rules. So why do countries include investment in their trade agreements? There might be different reasons for that. So first thing is they trade increasingly within global value chains. This is basically what I just said. Trade and investment are very closely interlinked. Then it might also be the case that the trade partners have very different national regulations, very different realities on the ground, and then it might make sense to regulate investment on an international level, either because they're just very different or because one country has very low standards. And these are the two aspects that I'm mostly interested in my empirical analysis, but of course I also have to control for other factors. Because it might be the case that countries just include investment because other countries do it. So there's a big literature in PTA formation, VIT formation, looking at contagion effects or domino effects. So this is something that I want to control for. Then it might also be the case that countries do it just because they always do it. So they negotiate on the basis of a model treaty that includes investment or it doesn't, and then depending on the bargaining power of the other party, it might be there or not, but this is something we have to look at as well. And then of course it's possible that it's just become a trend over time. So concerning the data, I'm using the data set that is based on Bruhn et al. Was extended by Kohl et al. To include 300 trade agreements, and I've already said something about the differentiation between enforceability and coverage. And then, of course, there's a very new, or quite new database, let's say newly available database called DESTA, which also has investment coded, and I will look at that over the summer and see whether it yields different results. Then I use the standard gravity data set that's used in much of trade analysis. Concerning global value chain trade, I have obtained data from ArcTat. So global value chain participation is measured by the amount of imports from other countries that are used for one's own exports. So that's two border crossings basically. I import to export it again. And it's also my exports that are then exported from another country again, so another two border crossings. So this is the indicator I'm using for global value chain participation. And then I include some institutional variables and economic variables, basically the standard stuff. Concerning the methodology, so my dependent variable is a binary outcome, so either yes, and the country includes an investment provision, or no, it doesn't. So that's just a very standard profit model that can easily be done by any software package. But then what I also want to do is capture the interdependence between countries. So this is basically the second equation you see here. And the difference is this spatial term. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that. I keep it short, but just to give you an idea. So this is basically the response of myself to other countries' policy decisions. So it captures how much my decision is dependent on what other countries do. And W is the weighting matrix. So I'm assuming here that I'm more influenced by countries that are closer to myself. And that is also quite standard in the literature. That term does make estimation a bit more difficult, actually a lot more difficult, but I will not go through the details. It's because observations are obviously not independent anymore. I deliberately model it that way because I want to capture that. And then I'm doing Bayesian Monte Carlo Markov chain procedures, but yeah, I've omitted the second slide on this because it might be too detailed. So this is the first half of the regression table. As usual, it doesn't fit on one slide, but I'll walk you through that. So the first variable is the spatial term, and I don't find any significant effect on that. What I find is that countries that are more different in terms of GDP, economic power, and in political regime are more likely to include investment provisions. So this is some indication that countries that are very different on the ground do include investment provisions. But this is actually reversed for enforceability. This is also a bit what we saw in the graph from the EU. And it might be explained by the fact that countries that are very different in political regime, in economic size, might find it just a lot harder to agree on common rules that are then binding. And that is at least my interpretation. Then I do not find any significant effect for the difference in legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks, property rights protection, etc. That's the lack of diff indicator. So that I was a bit surprised about that, but it might just be too rough a specification. What is also quite interesting is the check sum. So that's the number of veto players in a country. And it's not significant over all specifications, but it's always negative. And that means that the higher the number of veto players in a country, the less likely it is that investment is incorporated. And that's actually, it does make sense, I would say. Propensity then is a country's propensity to include investment. So that's just the share of all the agreements that includes investment. And the idea behind is that if they have a model treaty, they are more likely to include it again. And I do find a very significant and positive effect on that. Now moving to the economic variables. Interestingly, I do not find a very strong effect for FDI stocks or financial openness. But what I find is a very strong effect on global value chain participation. So countries that trade a lot within global value chains are a lot more likely to include investment in the agreement. I've also controlled for whether a bilateral investment treaty is in place or not. I've included the other common gravity variables, common language, common legal origin, common colonizer, these things, but they're not very interesting. And I've included a dummy to indicate the period in which the agreement was signed to make sure that I don't just capture a trend over time. And I've lagged all the economic variables to make sure that there's no problem with, or at least reduce the risk that there's reverse causality. Because it might be the case that because the agreement includes investment, they trade more in global value chains. So what I've done is using a lagged indicator of global value chain participation to make sure that it only goes one direction. Okay, so this is just a wrap up. So I do find evidence that a reason for including investment might be the trade within global value chains. It is a bit mixed whether it is the case that different national regulations play a role. So I found a positive sign for difference in political regime and also for overall economic development. Also, if I include a North-South dummy, it does yield the same results. But for the legal framework indicator, I do not find it. Then I do find a positive effect for the propensity to include investment. So it might just be the case I do it because I always do it. However, there does not seem to be a response to other countries' policy. But of course, that might be the reason why I don't find that. So there has been a lot of evidence on these contagion effects already, and it might be the case that the weighting by geographical distance is just not the right idea. So it might be that I'm more influenced by my main trading partners, so then I would need to weigh by trade flows, or by my main competitors in terms of foreign direct investment, then I would have to weigh by foreign direct investment competition. And that is a bit more complicated because that again is endogenous, but it's not impossible, and it's something I want to try over the summer. And it also does seem to be a trend over time, so I've not included the results of the period effects in my table, but some of them are quite significant. This is just further steps. Basically, I've already said I want to look at a different weighting scheme to make sure, to find out whether there is no contagion or spatial effect, or whether it's just the wrong variable. Then I will try the other investment indicator to see whether I find the same results. It also has a broader coverage, so I will be able to include more trade agreements, which are of course also very, very valuable. And then it's very important also to treat the EU as a single actor. So what I've done so far is increased the spatial interdependence between EU observations by just saying their bilateral distance is 1 kilometer, which is basically nothing, which means they're very highly interrelated. That's how I've modeled it so far. But of course, the EU in-trade policy is not 28 single countries, but one. And of course, you can also model that in the data, but it would significantly reduce the number of observations. That's why I haven't done it so far. Because then the overall validity of the results is a bit more questionable. But I do have some more possibilities to increase sample size because I have some more data sets available now. So this is also a future step I want to make. Yeah, I hope this was interesting for you, even though it was not completely on the EU. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dominic. Sounds like you have a lot of work to do over the summer.
Yeah.
I was hoping to go to the beach.